This episode is brought to you by Alumni Q. For over 20 years, Alumni Q has been partnering with higher education institutions to build real, lasting connections that drive engagement, whether through events, volunteer management, or personalized fundraising strategies. Their software is designed to meet busy, accomplished alumni where they are, making it easier to connect, communicate, and involve them in meaningful ways. From personalized event experiences to targeted communications, Alumni Q ensures your constituents feel seen and valued. With 96% of clients staying with them long-term, Alumni Q's active support and responsive development make sure you always have the tools you need when you need them. If you're looking for a trusted partner that truly understands higher education and is committed to helping your institution succeed, consider Alumni Q, powering the connections that last. Visit alumniq.com to learn more. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for listening to Alumless for Friday, April the 11th, 2025. This is the Shared Goals for Alumni and Annual Giving Edition. I'm Ryan Catherwood. I am joined by my colleague, founder and CEO of CMAC. That's Chris Marshall. Chris, what's going on, sir?
Hey, man, how you doing? Good to see you.
Happy Friday.
Yeah.
On the show, we talk about engagement strategies and education advancement. We are live today, which we love to be live with our special guest, Sean Devendorf from Tufts University. If you're tuning in, please let us know in the comments by saying hello and what school you represent. I already see Pete Brumbaugh in there saying hello. Good to see you, Pete. But we'd be happy to answer any questions. And if we don't able to get to them here in the live show, we'll be sure to try to tackle them in the bonus segment. And if you have not subscribed already to the podcast edition of Alumless to hear our 30-minute bonus segment with all of our special guests, we appreciate you subscribing and adding us to your regular feed. And we are grateful for Steve Rittler and the team at Alumni Q for their partnership with us as a presenting sponsor of Alumless. Chris, all right, so on the show today, we've got a great guest to talk about alumni engagement and annual giving. It is a topic that we often tackle on the show because it is an important one. We often use the notion that merging alumni engagement and annual giving will help create more efficiencies, right? And I guess I wanted to start the show off by asking, well, what do we mean by that, right? Like, what do we mean by efficiencies? And what are the outcomes that the alumni engagement and annual giving merger and these efficiencies are going to create if done correctly?
Yeah, and the classic consultant depends answer. It depends is the one we always use. But if you are in a small shop at a liberal arts college, you probably already behave in an integrated way. Most of the time, you see that sort of a cross advancement. I was just talking to a client yesterday who has 14 staff in advancement. Half of them are in alumni, annual giving, and events. They already are behaving the way. It's when you get larger and more complex is where you start to see the big benefit, I think, of the efficiencies that come with it. And it comes in the form of communications. It comes in the form of volunteer management. It comes in the form of experiential and looking at the case categories. That's where I've seen it. And to think that you can merge a shop by taking the alumni team and the annual giving team and leaving them exactly the same and having them report into a new one single leader is a solution. It's one that I think, could work, but I think the opportunity to get the work that does overlap across both areas, and that's usually around communications where we see it the most, occasionally volunteers, and in some cases experiential areas is where you see, I think, the biggest opportunity there. So I like to look at, for example, if there's a young alumni person on the annual giving side who focuses on those audiences, and there's someone over here programmatically, their desks should be next to together. They should be best friends. They should be doing all their things together. It's stuff like that is where I've typically seen the most advances being made here. Reunion is another area. Reunion programming, class-based reunion planning and programming, but class-based reunion fundraising, and so on. There's all kinds of examples underneath it. Really curious to see how this plays out when we talk to Sean here in a moment at Tufts, but that's where I typically see those efficiencies coming.
Yes, certainly the reunion example, right, is the one that's sort of been around the longest, I suppose, with respect to the alignment around that particular pan university event, but there's so many other opportunities. Chris, why do teams fall short when they attempt this merger sometimes?
Yeah, I think one reason is that they don't fully integrate. They just have reporting lines come up to the same person and they stay in their silos. That's one place. Um, the other, Frank, I mean, to be totally honest with you, and I'd love to get Sean's take on this, is that I haven't seen any school who's made this merger conduct a long-term experiment around it, other than schools that have been doing it forever. So there's like Georgia Tech, for example, has had this model forever, and Texas A&M, I think, has it as well. So there's a few places where they've always had annual giving, alumni. But when you see in the last 25 years I've been in the industry, what I've seen is them come together, come apart, come together, come apart. And there's lots of places that have that history, even in their own institution, where they've had them combined. So until we have a 10-year track record of multiple schools doing it in a fully integrated way, we're not going to know. And I think the biggest reason for failure, frankly, is that the vice president or the AVP or somebody in the equation changes. Somebody leaves the institution or goes else, whatever. And then they don't like the model and they change it back to the other way, or they go in a different direction. So for me, I think we need consistency and a few long-term experiments for this to really work.
Yeah. It's also interesting because, like, annual giving, what we think of it is often sort of broken up into different components, right? One
Right.
is leadership annual giving, which maybe works best under development, or
Correct. I
advancement
agree with that.
marketing,
Yep.
which maybe works best combined with communications. But then there's engagement programs around giving, right? Which maybe is best aligned with your alumni team, for example. But all right, well, let's
Yeah.
bring out Sean, who's got all the answers. I've got no doubt about that. Sean, what's going on?
Hey Ryan, hey Chris. I thought I was gonna get some consulting advice during this call, and you'd have all the answers. So maybe we should rethink the program here.
If you've been listening long enough, you'll know that our answers are usually in the "it depends" category.
That's fair. That's fair.
Sean Devendorf is the executive director of alumni engagement and annual giving at Tufts University. Sean, maybe we could start off with a little bit about your journey. Can you tell us, your pathway and advancement and what brought you to your current role at Tufts? You came up through the annual giving side of the shop, right?
Yeah, it's actually I started at a really small shop, so I had kind of that do everything type of experience right out of college. So I went to Vassar College out in Poughkeepsie, New York. I was thinking about careers in advertising, work interning at a large ad agency. And through just kind of circuitous events, someone suggested looking into fundraising and development work, and registered with Carney Sando, which is a placement firm for secondary schools. And right out of college, I was working at a small private boarding school, junior boarding school. And with the smaller the school, the more responsibility you have. So my first job out of college, I was director of alumni relations, associate director of development, with pretty much zero experience except for a lot of energy. And it was a really good overall experience for me. I had great mentors there. I was able to really understand kind of how alumni engagement and development work together. I mean, I did everything: communications, website, photography. Started an art gallery there. Let's try and think, charitable gift annuity program, auction. So you really get full fledged kind of a little bit of everything in that kind of environment. And I think that's a really good start. I mean, it's benefits of starting in a large shop too, but you really saw everything. And it gave me a good framework for what development is, how it operates with alumni engagement. And then from there, I moved back to the Boston area, started working at Tufts. And I've been at Tufts for 18 years now. So I started at Tufts in the Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy. So a smaller shop in a larger organization. And they're focused on alumni engagement and annual giving. Eventually moved up a little bit to focus more, able to hire someone to manage the alumni engagement program and focus on major gifts and annual giving. And then a new position was created centrally as the senior director of annual giving for Tufts, meant to kind of bring together the annual giving functions within the development office, and then also work across graduate and professional schools in ways that we could centralize and share best practices. So I was in that role for a little over 8 years. Before then, now kind of where I am now is executive director of annual giving and alumni engagement, which was also a new role that was created, that I applied for about a year ago now, looking to oversee those two areas. I think it's probably the most succinct way to summarize it all.
Well, it was good, and
I
I
agree.
certainly agree with you. My first job in our space was in an independent school as well, and I agree that it's a really great way to get to know the education advancement business. But I guess before we get into some strategy, Sean, How do you define the relationship between alumni engagement and annual giving in today's advancement model?
Yeah, it's a really it's a good question because I think it's different and evolving. I was talking about this earlier today. I see alumni engagement as really at its core any way that an alum is connecting back to the university. So we're talking a little bit about this. It's not necessarily it has to be through an alumni engagement office activity, but if they're connecting back with a faculty member, they are speaking at a class. That's engagement, whether or not it's happening through our office. The alumni is connecting back to the institution and engaging in it in some way. And obviously, in alumni engagement, we set up a lot of strategic events opportunities for them to have it be a more structured engagement and really looking to focus on what we believe are ways that they want to connect back with the university. Uh, and then annual giving is kind of their entry point for how they're going to engage philanthropically with their alma mater. So if think of alumni engagement as kind of all encompassing, how are you connecting back? How are you thinking about the university as an alum? And then annual giving, kind of layering that on top of, once you're engaged or thinking about giving, annual giving is your entry point. And I think both alumni engagement and annual giving, we're almost, you see this too, we're almost the retail arms of the operation. So how a alum is interacting with brands that they enjoy or companies that they're part of, they almost expect the same experience from their alma mater. Like, how do we make it really easy for them to connect to what they're passionate about? Are we able to really demonstrate that we know them and what we're sending to them and how we're engaging with them? I think both annual giving and alumni engagement kind of have that responsibility, which can be challenging. Obviously, a large Fortune 500 company's resources are a bit different, and we can't quite deliver the same digital experience. But I think there's some element of that.
Sean, I know Ryan and I in the open were talking about how there are examples of these mergers, and your reunion program for both planning of the event and fundraising were already operating in a merged way. In fact, led mostly out of the annual giving side of the equation, even before officially. But what was the prompt? What was the moment that kind of got your institution to say we should put these together across the whole, all facets of it?
I think it was a couple of years ago. So this position was officially created about a year ago when it was posted. And we've been really intentional about saying that we're working to align annual giving and alumni engagement. So we've been really intentional with that word alignment because I think there's unique attributes of both areas that are really important for engagement and giving purposes. And we want to retain what works really well, but we want to align in the ways that we can be efficient, effective, and create a much more unified experience for our alumni. Because as an alum, you don't want to get 6 things one day, 4 things the next day that aren't connected at all. And you're wondering,
Right.
why am I getting 10 emails? Do they know what they're sending? And, why is this something that I'm not really interested in that I'm getting? They're inviting me back to this type of event. Then they're soliciting me for this type of gift. That's, I think, where we were coming towards is saying, how do we make this a better experience for our alumni? How do we make good use of our resources? Because we want to make sure that we're using the resources we have available to us, both budget and staff, in a really effective way. So we know what we need to do to expand and continue to engage more alumni and really build that funnel. So we want the funnel to be very clear, long term. What's the engagement? What engagement points are most directly connected with increased involvement, increased engagement, and increased giving? And I think as a unified team, we can answer that question much more effectively moving forward.
Yeah. I love that you used alignment versus merger. Puts panic in the in the minds of some people when you think about acquisition and mergers, right? Like something's going to go away in this whole thing. And really, what you're talking about is just being more efficient and being donor alumni centric in many ways. I love that. You just mentioned a few of the biggest benefits from it, but others that you can think of, whether it's operationally within your team or to the alum. You just mentioned a whole bunch of benefits to the alum. They get a little more streamlined interaction. And the phrase I always use, Sean, is I want institutions to talk to their alums, or if I'm an alum of an institution from my alma mater, to talk to me like they know me, right?
Yeah.
Other benefits that you can share internally or externally.
Yeah, I think internally, one of the early things that come out of this, and I know it sounds pretty simple, but just really sharing across teams kind of what we do. So that's been really a lot of what we focused on this year is just educating each other and like, here's the programs I'm working on, here's what my team does, and here are the outcomes of it. So there's a lot of good work happening in a lot of different pockets, but we don't always coordinate on what that work is and how effective it is. So internally, I would say just focusing on that sharing, because then you see natural areas of collaboration. It's like, all right, so you're have a young alumni events focused on these areas or these affinity groups. Great. We have some giving initiatives that could actually some crowdfunding projects that students started that maybe we didn't think about connecting with that affinity group because we weren't aware of it. So now let's take that crowdfunding project that's focused on the Tufts University Prison Initiative and kind of connect it with a young alumni group we know that was involved in that when they were students. So I think that's what some of the early wins are for us, is just that setting of communications, awareness, what programs are happening internally. From an alum's perspective, what we're building towards is a more cohesive communication and engagement strategy. I think that's a longer term goal. There's systems needs there's data needs, but it's what we want to create is that, as you said, Chris, we want our alums to feel like we know them and that we're communicating to them in a way that adds value, and also that we're just adding value to what we're offering. We don't want this to be a one-way street where we're saying, please come do this, please come do this. But we really want to be able to say, here's what the university is offering to you. Here's what the alumni community, the alumni association is offering to you as a benefit or as a way to get involved or as something that can help with your career or help with your network.
Sean, the theme of the show today is around shared goals. And you alluded to a little bit around how when there's more transparency and more open discussions about alignments, that some of those shared goals begin to emerge. And I guess I was wondering, how have those discussions kind of that you've been having led to more shared goals? And, what is that a pain point? I mean, how do you think about the idea of shared goals and sort of the challenge of optimizing this relationship, this alignment?
Yeah, so we've started this process in like late July, so we're a little late into the kind of goal setting process for this fiscal year. So that's what we're really setting our framework for FY26, is thinking about what are our goals, how do we create shared ownership over some of the goals from an alumni donor to an alumni engagement perspective. So I think that's something we're really going to build towards. I know we've talked a little bit about kind of some specific shared programs. There's been some young alumni events we've had that have been really successful. They've rebranded our young alumni campaign as Bold Bows of the Last Decade. And the team has just done a wonderful job of having, I want to say, events across 8 cities, engaging volunteers. So I think, and that's been an ongoing relationship that we're able to strengthen and bring in members of our, Tufts Annual Giving marketing team, our alumni engagement team, and our volunteer team within annual giving to really create a more cohesive experience and have more alignment on what are the fundraising goals for the event, what are the engagement goals, how do we understand all those, and then how do they layer up. So next year, what I'd like to do is build in engagement goals that have a pipeline to giving goals. So I think that's what we're going to build towards. It's just going to take some time and consistency.
Yeah. As you've been working the last year after this alignment, not merger alignment, what have been some of the biggest pain points or redundancies that maybe you saw between the two teams before the integration versus after?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I saw in the beginning, I talked a little bit about it. It's just getting an understanding for what everyone does on both teams, and I just don't want to underestimate how much time I think you should spend on kind of really working to build trust and build awareness of kind of what teams are working on. I think we just did earlier this week, just had conversations with teams and said, what do you think is going well? And what's the one thing that you want to change for FY26? And so the things that are going well, one thing I have no control over that worked well, and I've taken no credit for it, is our teams moved to the same floor. So that was a kind of more of a hybrid work situation. We're consolidating space, but that was so important. We see each other more, we're around each other more, and just having that element of connection has really helped kind of build that team and build more opportunities for collaboration. Where the pain points are, redundancies. Our reunions team, and Chris talked about this. They've worked closely together, and I think they're continuing to find ways to work even more collaboratively. And some of that is around communication. How do we streamline the communication with those groups? And communication is probably one of the biggest ways that we can streamline and collaborate and kind of reduce friction with our alumni base and internally moving forward. So really getting aligned email calendars, print mail. And I don't know if other schools are seeing this, or I'm curious your perspective. We rely so heavily on email communication that annual giving still does a fair amount of print because we know print works. There's purpose for it, direct mail. I feel like alumni engagement has moved away from print. It is so focused on email. But when you actually dig down into how many alumni you can contact via your email platform, I'm guessing the majority of universities are 50 to 60% of their alumni they can actually contact when you look at unsubscribe rates, when you look at email addresses and undeliverability. And then from that, you look at open rates. So that's one of the things I want to think about moving forward is how do we add back in other communication channels that are not email to our alumni engagement practice and really be intentional about how we're marketing ourselves as an alumni engagement function.
You hit right on a theme we hear consistently across, and whether it's email or print, non-solicitation messaging is critically important to mix into the group. We'll get into that as we go along here, but yeah, agreed.
So there's I think one of the great opportunities with the alignment is the balance, Chris, that you're talking about, right? Between solicitation and providing value for engagement, right? And
Right.
together you can coordinate that value, I think, a little more cohesively and strategically.
Yep.
But Chris, when you provide coaching as a thought partner with working with teams that are working on this alignment, what are some of the important steps that teams need to be thinking about maybe early on in the process?
Sean, you nailed it. I think I'd written some notes here, and you almost, trust, building trust. Culture is going to exist in organizations, and when you go to a merged, aligned direction like you guys have just done, what you have are people who are willing to go in that direction, and others who are not, and that's culture. It exists in an organization. So getting folks, here's what I'm saying. Ultimately, summary is this. Don't underestimate the amount of change management that will be needed to do the work. And part of it is communications with who does what and what our role was and what your role is and understanding what those are. But that the old saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast is a real thing because people will come to the equation with a presumption of what it is. There are alumni staff members out there, maybe some who are listening to our podcast or on the call live, who say, I am not a fundraiser. I am a friend raiser. That's the old term that's been used in the space. Right? And these are the bad guys over here, the fundraisers. Now you're putting me with them, aligning me with them, whatever term, and
That's
they
not
will
what I
come
signed up
kicking and
for,
screaming.
right? Yeah.
You're right, exactly. If you're going to, I've heard this line recently. If you're going to make me a fundraiser, pay me like a fundraiser because I'm not paid the same way as someone who's on the fundraising side. And I have very little patience for that. And so you need to be anticipating that and get people sort of ready for those things and work through the communications and change management that's needed. That's something I think most schools underestimate when they go this route. And sometimes that means retraining, or sometimes it means exiting and rehiring people who do understand what it looks like to do both. Let me be clear about this. I am not suggesting all alumni engagement professionals should be solicitors being going out and asking people for money. When I say you're a fundraiser and you're on the alumni engagement side of the equation, you all identify, you all cultivate, and you all steward. You may never solicit somebody for a gift, but if you do any one of those three things, ideally all three of those things, you're a fundraiser. I hate to tell you, because those are all parts of the fundraising cycle. And to me, blending that notion together and getting people to rethink is all critical in this whole thing. And I had two other notes here, and here's from Sean on this. I'll follow up, but reporting lines are going to be important. Who reports to who, and then those blended, merged opportunities that come with this alignment, where you take the student and young alumni people, put them together, reunion people, put them together, and so on. Before I ask Sean my follow-up question, Ryan, looks like you had a follow-up on your own.
Well, I actually, it was funny. I see Sam Frost from Ohio State
Yeah. Hey,
on
Sam.
Zoom today, and she, was on the show a while back, and that was an example of a less of an alignment, but more of a merger, a collapsing and a
Right. Yeah.
rebirthing, like a creating a new organization. And there's definitely a difference, right? I think in terms of how complex, sort of getting to your next question, Chris, around restructuring, right?
You gotta ask it.
That
Go ahead.
that things become. Well, I mean, the question is about restructuring the teams, right? Or how have you been thinking about hybrid roles, new roles, reporting lines, the redesign of the org chart, and so on?
Yeah, and that's definitely something that's ongoing. I would say the largest structural change that we made this year was to have our annual giving volunteer fundraising team and our outreach and engagement team and alumni engagement report into someone that was kind of promoted into a new role that oversees both programs. So the intentionality there was that these teams have a lot of shared goals and shared opportunities to work together. How do we make it more effective and efficient for them to have a streamlined decision process? So they're literally on the same team now, so they can make decisions and have conversations about strategy in a much more concerted way. So I would say that's been the most immediate change that we've made. That's been, I think, something that we're trying to do to create that collaboration between reunion fundraising, reunion engagement, and also our young alumni and student programs are all under that same kind of process. So I would say that's the biggest thing structurally. And Chris, I just want to pick up on something you said too, just in terms of that communication, the culture each strategy. I think I always think back. I'm like, well, what have I done wrong so far? Like, what can I improve? And I think the biggest things I always come back to is like, well, I could have communicated something more effectively, or given more lead time, or given more opportunity for input. It's rarely been like, oh, I think that was the wrong strategy that we took there. Because strategies you can change. You test something, you see if it works. And if it doesn't work, you change it. When you communicate or do something, that hurts the culture, that takes a much longer time to repair. So I have been really trying to be very intentional about thinking how we bring teams together, seek opinions, seek feedback. And it hasn't been perfect, and kind of learning along the way. But I do think that building trust, communication, and collaboration is going to be more important in the long term than saying day 3, here's the exact strategy that we're taking moving forward. Because I don't think anyone that's new in a position should know that. I don't think you're going to know on day 3. I think you got to really listen and understand the people that have been working on this for years.
Great advice. Yeah.
Sean, if you could tell Sean summer 2024, give him some advice right now about, the next year that was about to come, what would you tell him?
Over communicate, right?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much like over communicate. Like, however clear you think you're being, you're probably not being clear enough. And that's both from, I would say, making sure people understand kind of roles and responsibilities and kind of what they're responsible for. Because as you're going through a process like this, sometimes things get a little bit fuzzy, and it's like, well, who's working on this? Who's working on this? So I think just clarity, communications, and transparency is something. And also, just these things take time to say, like, make sure that you're getting the culture right, and don't, every change isn't going to happen overnight. So think about what you're trying to do, what you're trying to align, make sure you have good input, and that you're working together collaboratively on it. Because it's, these are large organizations, are, need everyone kind of moving in the same direction.
Yeah.
We warned you we might go off script, so I'm going to ask you one more here. So you have some Tufts folks on the call today. What do you think they'd say about the process over the past year? And then,
good question.
Then weigh in. The folks who are on, tell us what you really think.
I would say there's positives in that we are, working towards some shared goals. I think there's still some confusion over, exactly how is this working? What should we be thinking about next? I think they would probably say we can continue to build on the trust and collaboration between teams and communication, and kind of really what the shared metrics are going to be moving forward. That might be one of the things that's hardest to define.
Yeah.
Hopefully they agree.
How big is the team? Roughly, real quick, I know we have to wrap, Ryan. How big, both sides?
About 35 FTEs across annual giving and alumni engagement. About 35 FTEs across annual giving and alumni engagement.
It's a big team. So pretty big team. Yeah,
it's
great.
Awesome.
Ryan, so tell us who's coming up next. I know we're at that half hour goes so fast when we're live like this, but thank you, Sean. Ryan, who's next coming up for us? You got Alumless World next week and Alumless after that.
Alumless. We're going to pick up the conversation with Sean in the bonus section. So if you're listening to the podcast, we'll be back after the break. But before we let everybody go from our live listening audience, next week I'm really excited. We have a great episode of Alumless World with Dr. Serge Sitch. And Serge is currently a lecturer, a faculty member at the International Business School in Budapest, Hungary. But prior to that, he was the vice president of alumni relations for Central European University, and which was located in Hungary prior to a move as a result of kind of the political climate in that country. And we talked, Serge, about that interesting dynamic, and it's a great conversation. So excited to share that on Alumless World next Friday. Friday after that, we've got Jeff Williams, and Jeff is the Assistant Vice President for People and Engagement on the University Relations team at the University of Maryland Foundation. And so he's got an interesting kind of hybrid role that's unique in our space, and we're going to sort of lean into discussion around people and culture and its impact on engagement. So thank you so much for listening, everybody live. Sam and Margot, Michelle, Katie, Tom, Scott, Megan, Kira, Lola, Brian, Steve, Lindsay, Pete.
Yeah, you had a big following, Sean.
Yeah.
Good. Yes,
I'm grateful for you all for tuning in, and we'll be back after the break on the podcast. And for those of you who are joining on LinkedIn, we'll see you next week with Serge Sitch on Alumless World. Take care.